vamos a estar aquí no tanto como directores de cine, sino como asesores legales en la importancia de la asistencia legal en esta materia para abarcar el tema, como ya se ha dicho, de los aspectos legales en la distribución de obras cinematográficas, desde su creación como derecho de autor, o sea, desde la génesis misma. Vamos a darle una relación completa, un viaje desde el inicio de la película como obra de una realización intelectual hasta su distribución en el mundo. Ante todo, por igual, las gracias a los anfitriones, a Funglode, en la persona de Omar de la Cruz, de Ivette Marichal y de todo el equipo y personal técnico y demás que han hecho posible que hoy estemos ante ustedes. Me acompaña Fernando Ramírez, colega, ya muy buen amigo, y entre nosotros vamos a desarrollar este tema desde dos perspectivas, desde la realidad dominicana ante una industria que tiene un marco jurídico que apenas acaba de entrar en vigencia de año y medio, pero sobre todo, y ahí donde voy, el plato fuerte nos lo va a dar Fernando, desde la perspectiva internacional con todo el conocimiento y la experiencia que tiene en la materia. Fernando, para mi gran sorpresa, no solamente es un gran profesional, sino un conocedor y relacionador, componedor a nivel de las distintas modalidades y facetas que tiene esta gran industria a nivel mundial. Yo le voy a pasar la palabra a Fernando para entonces entrar en materia. Yo me pararé después a dar mi presentación y después nos volveremos a sentar aquí para compartir con Fernando la parte de él y poder entonces intercambiar aquí un conversatorio con ustedes y recibir más adelante las preguntas que ustedes puedan tener. Gracias de nuevo por estar aquí con nosotros.
Bueno, primeramente le voy a pedir disculpas porque aunque mi madre es dominicana y mi padre es americano, nacido allá, de padre puertorriqueño, a veces se me hace un poco difícil hablar español porque tengo que traducirlo automáticamente de inglés a español, así que, y más con estos términos que son un poco complicados, lo voy a intentar de ser simple, pero por la mayor parte espero que tengan paciencia conmigo porque espero más hablar en inglés que en español, pero lo peor que puede suceder es que si me encuentro en una posición que ni José María ni yo podemos, le preguntamos a su hijo, a José María, a Carol que está ahí, que no puede hacer asesoría legal y traducirnos, ¿no? I'm just teasing you, I'm sorry. Bueno, le quiero dar las gracias al festival, tanto a Omar y a Ivette y al presidente por invitarme. He participado varias veces creo que ya llevo como 4 años participando en el festival. Participo en festival como esto y conferencias mundialmente, pero para mí es particularmente un orgullo venir aquí y poder venir primero al país de mi madre y segundo un país que me pasé bastantes veranos, como muchos, aquí cuando era niño y cuando era teenager. Y para mí también es importante participar en estos tipos de eventos aquí, porque creo que es muy importante, no solamente es una cosa económica, pero una cosa cultural, ¿no? Espero que así como se desarrolle la industria y llegue no solamente a un nivel local o doméstico, pero internacional, ¿no? Pero para hacer eso se supone que se necesitan tener todo ¿cómo se dice? Se necesitan todo el equipo, ¿no? Tanto como los productores, tanto como los guionistas, tanto como los directores de fotografía, los editores, los compositores. Se necesitan asesoría legal, ¿no? Porque lo que he encontrado en años recientes es que aunque la ley esté bastante desarrollada o la industria esté un poco bastante desarrollada en los países, cuando llegan al final que es lo que vamos a hablar hoy, cuando llegan al final del proyecto, encuentro que mis clientes han usado documentos que entonces, cuando llegan al final, los distribuidores o los programadores, tantos como en los Estados Unidos como en Europa, que son los mercados primarios, ¿no? Encuentran que no, se les hace un poco difícil aceptar esos documentos para ellos poder entonces distribuir la película, porque hay conflictos en los términos o faltan ciertos términos que no están hechos. Entonces lo que se supone que esto, o sea, hay que comenzar de nuevo, ¿no? a construir todos esos documentos. Yo encuentro que en un aspecto que lo que vamos a hablar hoy, si se hacen todos estos, si se preparan desde un principio y tanto los colegas de nosotros aquí y los productores tienen una idea básica de cómo es el proceso legal desde un principio, yo creo que estas son cosas que se le va a hacer mucho más fácil al productor, porque lo peor es para un inversionista y para un director, para un guionista, para un productor, que laboren muchísimo para poder tener la película. Entonces al final no puedan distribuirla o se encuentren con problemas o un costo, se les sube el costo por esa cosa que se la han complicado. Así que espero que hoy podamos hablar más con un poco más de detalle de eso.
Bueno, me voy a levantar ahora para hacer mi presentación, pero primero le quiero presentar la nueva imagen de la oficina, que estamos justamente aprovechando el marco de esta sexta edición del Festival Global Dominicano para presentarles nuestra nueva imagen y qué mejor escenario que este, justamente en un tema tan actual, tan moderno y que es una industria pujante. Igual queremos nosotros en este sector pues servir de apoyo al cine dominicano. Así que vamos a rodar hacia el podio para hacerles la presentación. Creo que no me voy a salvar, voy a tener que ponerme los espejuelos definitivamente, pero vamos a arrancar. El tema a desarrollar, como ya hemos dicho, son los aspectos legales en la distribución de obras cinematográficas, desde su creación como derecho de autor. ¿Cómo nace todo esto? ¿Cómo nace un proyecto de cine? ¿Cuáles son los derechos que desde sus inicios, desde su génesis, se van creando? Tenemos la Ley de Cine Dominicana, de apenas reciente promulgación en el año 2010, llamada la de Fomento a la Actividad Cinematográfica en la República Dominicana. Esta ley regula toda persona, toda actividad que se dedique en la República Dominicana, básicamente a estas 5 actividades: la de creación, la de producción, la de distribución, la de exhibición y la de formación cinematográfica audiovisual. En mi presentación me voy a limitar prácticamente a las 3 primeras, porque le quiero dar la cadena completa, desde la creación, desde la semilla, hasta la distribución, que es el material en el cual nos vamos a concentrar y que, como les he dicho, el plato fuerte nos lo va a dar Fernando cuando yo termine. Apenas le voy a dar yo la introducción para entonces pasarle la antorcha y que él de ahí pueda continuar. Toda película comienza, o todo proyecto de película, pero yo me voy ya al producto final, comienza con un pedazo de material existente. Este se origina en un libro o en un guión. Por ende, la creación de la obra parte de una persona, de su creador, de su autor. Si escribe un libro, pues naturalmente nos referimos a él como escritor. Si es un guión, como guionista. Lo importante de esto es que a partir de ese momento, lo que comenzamos a manejar es el concepto de la creación intelectual original y personal. ¿De quién? Del autor. ¿Por qué intelectual? Porque nace de su intelecto. Es lo que vamos a ver más adelante, la creación de su espíritu, la manifestación de su alma. En el sentido primario, no de originalidad, sino de primera vez. Y personal porque es inherente a esa persona, a su creador. Entendido ese concepto, y partiendo de lo que ha sido la evolución del derecho en la República Dominicana, que más bien tiene sus orígenes en las legislaciones internacionales, antes de existir en la legislación local marco jurídico o referencia legal interna respecto a cómo se venían a manejar estas relaciones, el país fue signatario de una serie de convenios internacionales, que son los que referimos ahí, y es a partir del año 2000 cuando comenzamos a tener la legislación interna producto de los requerimientos internacionales. Tenemos la Ley de Derecho de Autor del año 2000, la Ley de Propiedad Industrial igualmente, que es cuando el país comienza a insertarse formalmente a lo interno a los requerimientos de la Organización Mundial del Comercio. Entonces, una legislación importante y es producto también de otros requerimientos internacionales que cuando somos signatarios del Tratado de Libre Comercio con Centroamérica y Estados Unidos, pues también tuvimos que actualizar nuestras leyes de propiedad industrial, nuestra legislación de derecho de autor, y en el año 2006 estas sufren unas modificaciones importantes, sustanciales, precisamente para ajustarla a ese estándar internacional. Y, naturalmente, ahora nuestra ley de cine. ¿Cómo se protege la obra? Y la obra refiriéndome a cuando nace el primer derecho, el derecho de autor. Resulta que el derecho nace con la creación de la obra. Es a partir de ese momento, de la realización material de la misma. Deja de ser una idea, deja de ser un concepto y se plasma materialmente. En nuestro sistema de derecho, y es lo que regula la ley 6500, la de derecho de autor, hay el principio de registro declarativo de derechos, es decir, a partir de la creación de que existe materialmente, pues se crea el derecho de autor sobre esa obra. No hay necesidad como tal de registro, no es constitutivo de derecho, que es a lo que nos referimos. Y el registro se ejecuta ante la ONDA, la Oficina Nacional de Derecho de Autor. Ahora bien, si bien es declarativo de derecho, ya por imposición de la ley de cine, para otorgar el certificado provisional de nacionalidad dominicana al proyecto de obra cinematográfica que se debe tramitar ante la Dirección de Cine, sí están requiriendo la constancia de que la obra, la creación intelectual, haya sido registrada ante la ONDA. ¿Qué es el derecho de autor? El derecho de autor no es más que el conjunto de normas que regulan todos esos derechos subjetivos del autor sobre esa obra intelectual, sobre esa creación que hace. Entonces, protege lo que llamamos la manifestación del espíritu, la del alma. Es un concepto subjetivo que por provenir del intelecto, así es como se le hace referencia, y se se manifiesta en un contenido, un soporte material, que es cuando viene a tener cuerpo, cuando viene a hacerse tangible. Sin embargo, es un derecho real sobre una cosa incorporal, no es un bien como tal. Es una obra del intelecto plasmada en un pedazo de papel. Lo importante es saber que con el registro de la obra igualmente se hace extensivo al título que ésta tenga. Entonces, todo este conjunto de derechos exclusivos sobre la obra se divide en dos aspectos, en el aspecto moral y en el aspecto pecuniario. El aspecto moral es el atinente al autor, a la persona misma, y el derecho patrimonial es todo el contenido comercial pecuniario con el cual el autor puede comercializar a futuro. Y aquí ya comienza la cadena para fines de producción, distribución, exhibición, etcétera, que va a tener esa obra llamada película como producto final. Entendido que el derecho de autor se concibe o se divide en su aspecto moral, en su aspecto patrimonial, en cuanto a los derechos morales se refiere, este tiene que ver con la reputación del autor, su profesionalidad, su honor, su persona. Y en todo momento puede reivindicar la paternidad de la obra. La paternidad de la obra se refiere a que cualquier persona que utilice la misma por referencia siempre tiene que identificar la obra con ese autor. Igual puede reivindicar en todo momento la integridad, que ésta no sea deformada, mutilada, modificada de alguna forma que pueda alterar la película o alterar, perdón, la película no, su obra, su guión como tal, es inalienable, por ende no puede ser ni cedido ni transferido, imprescriptible. Esto quiere decir que durante toda la vida no hay un plazo perentorio fatal en el cual no pueda reclamar cualquiera de los derechos que se derivan de esta paternidad moral que tiene sobre su obra. Y la duración de este derecho es perpetua mientras tenga vida el autor y aún siga a sus herederos. Por ende, es irrenunciable. No se puede ceder. Esta es una característica muy particular del sistema civil. Creo que Alemania y Francia, nosotros la seguimos al igual que esas legislaciones, que es distinto al common law, y tal vez Fernando en su momento se referirá a ella, porque el derecho moral siempre sigue y pertenece al autor como tal. Los derechos patrimoniales, por su parte, es el conjunto de derechos exclusivos sobre la obra, y esta tiene la particularidad que se pueden manejar en toda su extensión y combinación. Esta se puede dividir, subdividir, ceder, licenciar en cualquier forma, parcial, total, con las restricciones, limitaciones o apertura que se quiera. Es lo que se llama la explotación económica de la obra en su sentido comercial estricto. El cedente, en este caso el titular del derecho, tiene en todo momento el control de la utilización económica de la obra. Y estos son los derechos que él puede comercializar. La duración de los derechos patrimoniales es mientras vida tenga el autor, más 70 años a partir de su deceso. Quiere decir que pasa a sus herederos o a su cónyuge. El Estado es, en última instancia, en ausencia de herederos y de cónyuge supérstite, quien recibe estos derechos. ¿Cuáles son los derechos de disposición a comercializar? Nos estamos refiriendo a los derechos patrimoniales. Están los de producción audiovisual, los de reproducción, los de traducción, modificación, conforme ustedes lo pueden ver ahí. Lo que tiene que ver con la producción audiovisual no es más que la realización, ya estoy pensando en el ámbito de la actividad del productor, todo lo que tiene que ver con la realización, el desarrollo del proyecto, el proyecto de película que se va a hacer. La reproducción, que tiene que ver con la fijación de la obra en su soporte material, en sus distintos, como existen hoy en el estado actual de la técnica. La traducción de la obra, cuando nos referimos a obras derivadas, quiere decir, por ejemplo, una telenovela que se convierte en película, o la obra que se lleve al teatro, o una serie de televisión que se convierta en película, por decir, tenemos el caso de Superman, Viaje a las Estrellas, cosas así. O sea, adaptaciones que se puedan hacer para distintos medios de exhibición. La modificación de la película como tal, la modificación de la obra en cuanto a adaptaciones que se le puedan hacer, su exhibición, sea a nivel, nuestra ley habla de la Cinemateca Nacional, el rol que esta tiene, la que pueden hacer sesiones privadas o sesiones públicas. Hay, por ejemplo, cineastas que pudieran una obra determinada darla para un público en particular, no necesariamente hacerla del dominio público, lo hacen en sesiones privadas, y los exhibidores, que son los dueños de las salas de cine, pues ya a nivel regional o a nivel nacional, pues es por donde estas son proyectadas. La distribución, ven a ustedes ahí las distintas modalidades de contratos o de tipo de acuerdos a lo que se puede llegar, desde la renta de la película, la que tiene que ver con las compañías de video, salas de cine, televisión, festivales, si la distribución se va a dar a nivel nacional, a nivel internacional, a nivel regional. O sea, hay toda una amalgama, y de ahí se derivan, por ende, una serie de contratos distintos de estipulaciones particulares. ¿Cuáles son las reglas para la cesión de derechos patrimoniales? Esto es muy importante. Tiene que ser un contrato escrito. Debe establecerse si es a título gratuito, si es a título oneroso. Lo importante de todo esto, y el resumen, es que estos contratos son de interpretación restrictiva. La ley de derecho de autor y la ley de cine en sentido general tienen un carácter social y un carácter público. de ahí que son de interpretación y por ende aplicación restrictiva. Todo lo que no esté plasmado de manera expresa, consagrado, en principio es que se dice que no está contemplado y por ende no está autorizado, está prohibido por el cedente de los derechos. Lo importante es saber también que hay dos modalidades, o tú puedes licenciar o puedes ceder los derechos en sentido general, parcial o totalmente, o licenciar, que es dar una licencia de uso que generalmente en el contrato de licencia es más característico, se establece el tiempo y el ámbito territorial para el cual se está otorgando. Entramos ya pasando de la autoría, de la creación del derecho de autor a sucesión y lo que tiene que ver con el productor per se. El productor en nuestra legislación puede ser persona física o persona jurídica. Sin embargo, la persona jurídica es la que vamos a ver más adelante, tiene la posibilidad de ser receptor de inversiones o de capital para fines de incentivos fiscales, tanto para sí mismo como para ese inversionista. Entonces, la actividad de producción no es más que la realización, la consecución y coordinación de todos los recursos que son financieros, de capital, técnicos, materiales y humanos para el desarrollo y la realización de la obra como proyecto que culmina después de su etapa de postproducción y de edición en la película que va a ser exhibida y va a ser proyectada. Esta pasa por distintas fases y vean aquí cómo a nivel de productor, desde la investigación y desarrollo y viabilidad del proyecto hasta su distribución, el productor tiene en su ámbito de acción todos estos derechos o todas estas funciones o actividades a las cuales de una forma u otra está directa o indirectamente involucrado. Aquí viene una pregunta que tal vez es una pregunta jaque mate para todo guionista, para todo autor. Y la verdad es, ¿qué ocurre con mis derechos? ¿Dónde estoy yo a futuro o desde que yo llego a un entendido económico en cuanto a mis derechos patrimoniales se refiere con el productor? A mí se me deja afuera, yo me quedo medio adentro, o yo me quedo totalmente afuera, o yo estoy con mis dos pies adentro. Entonces, pierdo todos mis derechos sobre el guión desde el momento mismo en que cedo al productor los mismos. ¿Qué me va a requerir? ¿Cómo puedo yo apalanquearme? ¿Cómo puedo yo negociar para quedarme de alguna manera incidiendo sobre ese guión que yo he creado, que le tengo que ceder necesariamente al productor, que es quien a su vez lo va a comercializar? Primero lo va a desarrollar y después lo voy yo a comercializar o no junto con él más adelante. Entonces, esa pregunta del millón de pesos, como decimos bien acá, va a depender de esto prácticamente. La participación del guionista en la producción de la película, en lo que tiene que ver con los aspectos creativos, en lo que tiene que ver con la promoción, comercialización, la distribución. ¿De qué va a depender? Bueno, va a depender de las credenciales y de la experiencia que tenga ese guionista, ese autor. O sea, de su nivel de control, de dominio, de incidencia, de injerencia. Esas credenciales particulares. Pero más que eso, para mí, a mi entender, hay un asunto de rapport, que es como llamado, de esa relación, de esa química, de esa empatía que pueda lograr el autor, el guionista con su productor. Entonces, esa relación personal que vaya a desarrollar, de negocio, sí, en el sentido, pero más que nada personal, muy como somos nosotros los dominicanos, que somos muy emotivos, muy sentimentalistas. Pues esa relación de confianza que se puede realizar y esa combinación de esos dos factores es lo que va a poder lograr de que ese guionista al final no haya sido descartado económicamente de lo que va a ser su película basada en su guión a futuro. Como dijimos, tiene que intervenir un contrato, por ende, la cesión de derechos patrimoniales debe producirse entre el cedente, llamado autor, el creador de la obra, y el productor. Y se aplican, naturalmente, las mismas reglas que ya hemos referido para la cesión de los derechos patrimoniales. voy a tocar un aspecto ya entrando más en materia, de cómo la producción tiene que ver con la inversión y el efecto que esto tiene a nivel de distribución, porque aquí comienza como un asunto de balance y de chequeo recíproco y de debida diligencia, que todo el mundo, ya todos los actores tienen, actores no refiriéndome en el sentido de personajes, sino todos los agentes que intervienen en estas distintas fases de la actividad regulada por la ley, que fue la que me refería al principio, de las 5, entran ya en función casi todos a la misma vez. Hay una realidad dominicana, y la realidad dominicana es que si bien los primeros pininos, como decimos, se dieron en el siglo pasado al nivel de los 1940 y hubo un boom en la cinematografía o en la industria no industria como tal, pero en el cine dominicano en los años 80, sin ningún marco jurídico, unos pioneros, unos atrevidos que se atrevieron, que llegaron a realizar obras cinematográficas. No es menos cierto que apenas tenemos una legislación que está en pañales, que tiene menos de 2 años de vigencia. Y producto de eso, como primero no hay la conciencia y no hay aún el manejo de la ley como tal y los conocimientos necesarios, y como es todo principio, todo inicio, donde naturalmente los más atrevidos, tal vez por eso podrán ser los más avanzados, pero podrán también, en lo que la ley se pone en práctica y comenzamos a tener un historial con el pasar de los tiempos de esto. Bueno, la realidad es que en nuestro país el productor requiere, por no decir que exige, ser el cesionario total de los derechos patrimoniales, de los derechos de explotación de la obra. Eso hace que básicamente el guionista, el autor, llegue, su vida económica pudiera terminar y llegar hasta ahí. Porque es que en la misma ley la actividad de producción refiere al productor como también realizador de la promoción y distribución de la película. Eso todavía son unos conceptos que en la letra, en el aspecto instrumental y formal de la ley tendrá que cambiar con el tiempo, porque también estamos refiriéndonos a un territorio nacional limitado como isla, pero esto tenemos que pensarlo en grande, como es la industria del cine, en el sentido global universal, más que internacional. El inversionista como tal se debe en primera instancia, el productor se debe en primera instancia a un inversionista. El inversionista, que para poderse acoger a los incentivos de la ley tiene necesariamente, y la función del abogado ahí es primordial, tiene necesariamente que hacer un proceso bien exhaustivo, bien detallado, de debida diligencia, con ese productor para comprobar que el productor es el cesionario de esos derechos patrimoniales que está alegando ser, pero sobre todo que ese productor ha cumplido con todos y cada uno de los requisitos establecidos primero por la ley de cine y después que ha sido cesionario de los otros derechos que vienen provenientes con respecto a la aplicación de la ley de propiedad industrial y la ley de derecho de autor. Están mencionados ahí, lo están viendo, no voy a ahondar más en cada uno de ellos. Pero sí, tal vez, con respecto al punto 8, relativo a los acuerdos que pudieran incidir en cuanto a derechos que haya reservado tal vez el mismo guionista o el mismo autor o los que participan en la fase de la producción de la obra cinematográfica, que muchas veces un director, actores o otras personas allegadas o directamente envueltas en el desarrollo de la película hayan podido tener también reservar derechos económicos con respecto a la distribución de la obra, que eso tiene necesariamente que tomarlo en cuenta el distribuidor cuando venga a hacer la debida diligencia de parte de él con respecto a la génesis misma del derecho de autor originada en esa obra ya registrada. Entonces pasamos a la distribución de la obra cinematográfica como tal. El distribuidor puede ser persona física o persona jurídica conforme a nuestra legislación.
y es el distribuidor el dedicado a la comercialización de los derechos de exhibición de películas en cualquier medio soporte. Estamos llamando de exhibición porque se le da participación aquí también a los exhibidores, que son los dueños de salas de cine, que ellos también tienen su rol, pero como le dije, me voy a limitar a esa tercera actividad, y ya prácticamente para terminar, que es la de distribución de las obras cinematográficas. Pero no sin antes referirme ya un poquito más detalladamente de que entre ese productor ya cesionario de derechos en su totalidad o en la modalidad o al límite o con las restricciones correspondientes según los contratos que haya dado, en la forma que haya podido contratar con otros que tengan injerencia en la película, intereses económicos en el producto de la distribución de la película, en el nivel que fuese, pues tiene que también formalizar un contrato con el productor, no sin antes hacer la debida diligencia para comprobar, al igual que hace el inversionista, de que se hayan cumplido esos requisitos y que real y efectivamente el productor sea cesionario de los derechos que alega tener, que necesariamente tendrá que documentarle. ¿Cuál es el ámbito de ese contrato de cesión entre productor y distribuidor? Simplemente para darles una introducción, tiene que ver en relación con el tipo de soporte material o electrónico que se le da a la obra. Ahí están los rollos de cine que se llevan todavía en motor de una sala de cine a otra, de 35 milímetros, hasta en forma digital hoy en día. Y están aquellos también en cuanto a la naturaleza, como llamo yo, o alcance de la comercialización, sea que usted lo vaya a distribuir, los derechos de distribución lo va a dar con respecto a las tiendas de renta de video, los vaya a vender públicamente en distintos puntos de venta, los vaya a dar exclusivamente para salas de cine, para televisión, para festivales, para el mercado nacional, para el mercado internacional, a nivel regional, a nivel universal, en fin, la variedad es infinita. Y con esto termino, para entonces darle paso a Fernando y podamos nosotros enriquecernos y deleitarnos con la parte ya más concreta de los aspectos legales, los tipos de contratos, la variedad de contratos que hay en materia de distribución y las estipulaciones, cláusulas específicas que deben ser tomadas en cuenta según los intereses que se quieran proteger por parte por todo el que tenga derecho, haya reservado derecho en esa actividad de distribución. Gracias por venir, gracias por esta atención que nos han dado y distinguirnos.
We're a small audience. Un poco pequeña cuando no estamos. Le pido pasito otra vez, voy a hablar en inglés. Yo presumo más o menos que la mayor parte de la gente que están aquí hablan en inglés o entienden inglés. So, thank you very much for bearing with me and for being so patient with me as I go through this. It's kind of hard to, to follow a presentation like that. All I have is some sheets in my head, and my colleague here has this amazing presentation here. And I feel like I'm in high school with some notes. But so let me start by saying that to echo what Jose Maria just said, my colleague, right, which is that every project that you start with, right, every film project starts with an idea, and then that idea becomes, hopefully, if you're committed enough and talented enough, it becomes a screenplay or a script, right? And then from there, you say to yourself, well, I'm ready to produce my movie, right? And if you're very lucky, you find the money for this, right, for your project, right? And that's when, if you're very lucky, it all starts to kind of settle in and say, this is serious, because now I am dealing with someone else's money that's being given to me, right? And when someone gives you this responsibility, you're supposed to deliver a product for them because they made an investment, right? And you do that, and then you find yourself having gone through that process, and for some reason not either because you hire an attorney or because you have an experienced producer who has produced projects and has gone through the motions for them to know, either because they've hired attorneys or they've gone out and they've produced enough projects to know that there are certain fundamental requirements that you will have and you will need in order for you to deliver not just your film that you've labored over for years to a distributor, but also the other what we call deliverables, other work product, and that would be the agreements, right? And so when I speak to either at producers academies across the country in the U.S. or at festivals or conferences in other countries, I often stress to people how very important it is for them to have some sort of legal counsel. The trick is that because the major markets are really the U.S. market and the European market, when we're talking about, of course, there's Bollywood, right, in India, right, and then there's in Nigeria, there's just what they call Nollywood, right, it's growing. Right? Those countries, they primarily produce for there. I mean, certainly Bollywood produces and they export to other places in the Asian subcontinent and Africa, and the UK and America. But for the most part, everyone that produces their film wants to get into the American market and the European market. And there's two markets here that are very similar, right? The American market and the British market in terms of these agreements that you find. So that, what do we find ourselves with? The first thing that a writer has to do, right, or a producer rather has to do, is acquire those rights, right? Which is what somebody was saying, right? Because you have no they'll be worthless. You can do absolutely nothing with them, right? And so, in some ways, some of these things are similar, right? Some of these laws, right? There's some subtle differences when a writer, a screenwriter, decides to create a screenplay. It's his or her screenplay. It belongs to the minute, at least in the U.S., right? The minute that you write something down, it's yours, right? Of course, it pays at some point to register, right? Like I saw there, register it with the Copyright Office in this case, because one, it puts the whole world on notice that it belongs to you, and two, if there's ever a lawsuit, and in the United States, we're the most litigious country in the world. Everyone sues for something or nothing. Of course, the person who's suing always feels it's for something, right? In order for you to get into federal court, you have to register your screenplay or your product with the Copyright Office, and you want to get into federal court because there's minimum amounts of money that you can make if you sue someone, right? You can, there's a minimum amount of damages. It's $100,000 at least you can make. So that's very similar, and you typically do that, right? But why is that important? Because I'm a producer, and I go and I say, I want to hire this writer, and I want to now produce this. And if I don't have those rights, all those rights stipulated, I then cannot, it'd be tragic. I then cannot proceed to produce that and then distribute the film. So what are some of the key elements you will find? In the States, we have something, and in the UK, because I have clients that have had their books or their screenplays optioned by British companies who want to, and it's strikingly very similar. And I'm on the phone talking to these attorneys, these agents from the UK, and I joke with them and I tell them, you guys base your agreements on our agreements. And they say, well, no, actually, we were around first. Remember, you were a colony, and they joke like that, right? But the agreement's actually very, very similar. And what are some of the key clauses that you'll find? So there's two things. You either, as a production company, you would hire a writer, and you would have a screenwriter agreement, or where you hire hire the writers to write something from scratch, right? Okay. Escucha.
Mira, cógete, porque no está siendo grabado.
So you have two sorts of agreements, or two typical agreements, right? One is where you hire a writer, and you may have an idea, a concept. You may have already optioned a book, or you may have gotten some information, an idea from an article, a newspaper article, a magazine article, and then you go and you acquire those rights, and then you hire a writer to do it for you, or you there's an existing material, whether it's a book or a screenplay, and you option those rights, and then you subsequently buy them. And this is very important, right? Because, well, Jose Maria was saying earlier, you can basically assign all of your rights as a writer over to a producer, right, to a production company, right? But over the many years that the industry has existed in the U.S., there have been standards that have been created. And these standards that have been created are partly because you've had unions. In the U.S., we have something called the Writers Guild of America. And these unions were in part created, like many unions, to advocate for members who felt that they individuals who their demographic, their constituents, were being exploited, right? So that, for example, if you look at Gone with the Wind, you'll see many writers on there. And some people, I've heard some historians and some lecturers say that half of the people who got writer credit on that screen didn't write a single element in the screenplay, right? And so over the years, pardon me, the unions have advocated, and they've created these standards that you can have. If you are a writer, screenwriter with credits, with enough credits, you can become a member of the guild. And then they set the standards, and then your attorney or your agent can negotiate up from there. But if you don't have enough credits, and you're a writer, and a very talented writer, and you're a writer from, say, the Dominican Republic, and somebody wants to option your material, right? And you don't have the right representation, you can't avail yourself, because you're not a member of the guild, of the minimum standards, right? So what are some of those minimum standards that you typically have, right? The first thing is, if you want to option an agreement, right? If you want to basically secure what we would call a lease, right? You don't, you could go to someone and say, here's a certain amount of money, and I'm going to pay you this amount of cash for your rights, for your screenplay, and I'm going to own it, and goodbye. That's it, right? Or, which is more standard, you could say, well, I don't know how much, first of all, I don't know that you're actually going to actually produce my film, or my screenplay. And as a screenwriter, your goal should be, not just to earn a living from it, have somebody pay you good money for it, but it should be to see your product on the screen, right? And to see it, eventually all over the world on television sets, right? And that's part of your career, because that's worth more than just earning a living, right? So what you typically do, what's typical in our industry is for you to say, I'm going to essentially lease this property, just like a car, right? Only it's intellectual property, right? I'm going to lease this property to you, my screenplay, for a certain amount of time. And I'm going to give you an option to buy it, right? But the lease that I'm going to give you, and there's something called consideration, which I understand is also here in the beginning, consideration. In exchange, it could be as little as $1. I'm going to give you $1. You're going to give me $1, which is unheard of, right? Well, I'm going to give you $1 for a certain amount of time. And during that time, which we call a period, you then can go put together the money, put together the director, put together the producers, basically put together a package, right? And if by the end of that time, you have all the money and have everything in place, I am then going to go and pay you a certain amount of money that we have agreed upon beforehand to do that, right? If I don't pay you that money, it's like a lease to, an option to buy. You lose it, and then somebody else can come and do the same thing that I did, right? So what are those things? It varies how long what we call the option period is. It could be anywhere between 6 months to a year and a half. The longer the option period that I have to produce your, develop and eventually get capitalization for get total capitalization for my project to produce the film, the more money I will pay you. But sometimes, I say there's a caveat to that. Sometimes you can go to someone can come to you who's a very experienced producer who has a lot of credits, who has maybe, you know, a deal with a network or a studio, and they will tell you, look, I'm not going to pay you a lot of money for your option. I'm only going to pay you a little bit of money. I'm only going to pay you $1,000, you know, for your option for, you know, 8 months. I've even heard some people say, I'm only going to give you $50 for 6 months to do this. But the difference is that if this individual is a renowned producer and they have a lot of experience and everybody knows who they are, that producer, even though they're only giving you $50 at that moment for those 6 months, stands a better chance of setting it up at a studio and turning your film into a multi-million-dollar project than your buddy who you love, who's a very nice guy and also has a lot of money and is going to give you $5,000 for 6 months. Maybe more money, but it may not ever happen. And it may not ever happen in a way that you like it, right? So the first thing that people generally negotiate is what we call the option and the period, right? That's very important because ultimately what we're talking about is you earning a living, you making money from what you do, right? But then what happens? You pay someone X amount of money for, say, maybe a year and a half, or let's just say, you know, 6 months. And then you go out as a producer and you put everything together and you have a budget and a plan, a proposal and a prospectus, and you have all the investors and the actors and their talent, and you get letters of interest from actors, big actors that want to come in and attach everyone. In order for you to actually proceed to produce the film, you have to pay someone money. What we call in the industry the purchase price, right? You're purchasing the rights to the... So you've paid somebody a lease, but you still don't own it. You just have exclusive right to do it so that if you're the writer, you can't go to someone else and do the same thing during that time, which is very important for me, right? So you have the money, I pay you. What do I pay you? Well, I can either pay you a specific amount of money, or I can pay you, but that specific amount of money is a little it can be a little tricky because if I set a figure, I could be overpaying you for the property, right? If I set, or I could be underpaying you. If you're the writer and you say, give me $10,000, you know, the purchase price at the end of the year will be $10,000 because, you know, the project is not going to be more than $200,000, right? But then all of a sudden the producer attaches some big names and the studio likes it, and then the budget becomes a $10 million project, and you're the writer and you got $10,000 and the project is $10 million. You're the writer, you're like, wait a minute, but the budget is bigger now. Why all of a sudden should I have to, you know, why should I only get, you know, $10,000 if the budget is $10 million? I thought the budget was only going to be $200,000 or $300,000, right? So what do? We generally say as, you know, in the industry, whether it's agents or attorneys, we're going to base what we pay you at the end of that period so that I can produce the film on a percentage of the budget. And usually that's 2.5% of the budget. And as a producer, you say to yourself, I want to put a cap on that, right? Because I don't want, if it's going to be 2.5% of $10 million, I don't want to end up overpaying you and paying you $250,000, $350,000, $400,000 for this property, right? Because I remember I was only going to pay you $10,000, right? But if you're the writer or the owner of the property, the novelist, you want a floor. Because you want to say for two reasons. One, no matter how small the budget is, this is the least I'm willing to give you for my property. I don't care if the budget is $1 million or $100,000 is the least. But also, as a writer, you want to be able to make sure that what's reflected, you know, on the screen is within a budget that's realistic. You don't want, if the film is a period piece, right? It's a piece about, it's going to be done here in the Dominican Republic about the colonial period. You can't do that for $100,000. You're probably going to need a couple of million. Otherwise, you're going to have a pretty bad production, right? And then it's not good for your career, right? So that's generally how that happens, right? So you have the option, you get the money, you pay someone the purchase price based on a percentage, you agree to a ceiling and a floor, and you do it, right? But what are 2 or 3 other things that I want to mention quickly? Because again, there's so many of these terms, and it's a lot of information, but I think people here should really understand this so that when they go and they speak to their producers, or they speak to attorneys, even here locally, you get a sense of what these terms are, so that when it's time to, if you get approached by an American, I mean, part of this law is to be able to encourage people from abroad to come and produce here, right? But maybe they decide they want to produce here, but they want to buy the rights to something, buy the rights to somebody's life, or buy the rights to somebody's screenplay, right? This is why some of these things are important. Or if you decide to sell it abroad, right? 2 or 3 other things that Jose Maria touched upon are, what other rights are you giving, right? What other rights are you giving as a writer, right? Are you just giving them all of your rights, or are you going to keep certain rights? And this is very important, because if you are a writer and you are, and I mean the screenwriters, I don't represent screenwriters, the WGA in America. And by the way, if you want to find out more about these things that I'm discussing, if you go online to WGA.org, you'll find out more about these things, about some of these things, about how they work. If you're a member of the Writers Guild, and there are certain minimums that they establish, how much they can pay for a screenplay or a teleplay, for how long, how many drafts, if I'm hiring you, if there's a polish, you know, but and there are certain things called separated rights, right? Certain things that I cannot give you, that the guild says that automatically, even if if your project, if you're going to hire one of our writers, and you're going to be a signatory to the WGA, and you have an agreement, I have an agreement with you as a writer, and you're a member of the WGA, and we are smart enough to put this all into a document. There's certain things that I cannot negotiate out of the contract, even if they're in the contract, that benefit you. Those are called separated rights. And those are very important. And one of those things is, if you're not a member of the guild, what we would call reserved rights, right? Well, somebody had mentioned earlier, he said, what rights are you giving? ¿Qué derecho estás cediendo, no? Right? What rights are you giving? Or what rights are you giving? Any and all rights for someone to produce? You're thinking, I'm giving you my screenplay, and you're giving me money, whether it's $10,000 or $250,000, for you to produce my film, right? But then the question is that all? If you grant all of your rights, that individual can then take that film and he can adapt it to other forms, other media, right? For example, they could turn it into a stage play, right? Into dramatic performance, right? That's a whole separate industry, a whole separate standard, a whole separate budget, a whole separate source of income, right? That if you do not have stipulations saying that, 1, you're giving those rights, or 2, you're keeping those rights, right? And then let someone else come back and negotiate and pay you, you're losing out on. And that happened to a client of mine. Well, sorry, that happened to 2 individuals who came to my office who wanted to hire me. And they said, we have a book, and a book publisher wants to buy, the rights to our book, our manuscript, right? But they didn't want to invest in a lawyer. I told them, look, this is how much we pay, how much I charge, this is what I do for you. They said, let me think about it. So what happened? They decided that they were just, going to wing it, and they signed a contract with the publisher, right? And this is very similar, this is different media. They signed with the publisher. Along comes Danny Glover, right? And Danny Glover says he wants to produce the film based on their book, right? So he goes to them naturally, talks to them. They say, well, no problem. We'll give you the motion picture rights. The problem was that when they signed with the publisher, they gave the publisher all those rights. So at the time, Mr. Glover was offering them a sizable amount of money, a couple of $100,000, right? They ended up getting very little money because, first, the publisher owned those rights. So let's just use a number, say Danny was offering them $100,000, right? The publisher said, well, we own them, and we have the right to give you 50% of that. So there's 2 of you, you can take 50. So already they've lost $50,000, right? Then they said, but however, before we give you this money, there's money that you owe us because we have to recoup our expenses in marketing your book and promoting and this and this and this. So this is what you owe us still. So this is your check. So they ended up with like 5% of what they would have ended up with, right? That's why that's important, right? If you're a screenwriter, and it's a similar sort of thing, if you're a screenwriter, what rights are you giving away? Are you giving away all your rights? Because if you are potentially giving away an extra source of income that otherwise you would not be entitled to, right? So those are what we typically call reserve rights. It's important for you as a producer to also know what rights are you getting, right? Am I getting just motion picture rights and TV rights? Am I getting the rights to, and all this is covered on the standard agreements in the US and in the UK, right? Are you reserving certain rights? Am I letting you reserve certain rights as a writer? Am I letting you keep stage rights? Am I letting you keep, if you're an author, the right to write sequels to your book, right? Author-written sequels. And if you're a screenwriter, am I letting you keep the right to make a book out of this? If not, I can then do it. And then all I'm entitled to do is share a small percentage of the profit with that. But that small percentage could be significantly different if somebody has to deal with me directly and they come to me to buy those rights, right? So that's very important. Also, there's certain revenue that you're entitled, that a writer is always entitled to, and they're called passive payments, right? You never have to, if it's negotiated, right? You never ever have to raise another finger, but if the film has incarnations of a prequel or a sequel or spin-offs, or if it's a film but it's put on TV, right? You're entitled to certain percentages for as long as that happens. If all you did was, which is I understand happens in many countries, and it's happened, I've seen it with some clients even in the US, is say, here, I'm handing this over to you, and here's a check for $10,000 and see you later, right? Then you're really losing out on potentially a big market, right? Potentially you'd be losing out on millions of dollars, right? And one of the last items I wanted to point out to, which is very important, is as a writer, do you have any approval right over your screenplay, right? It's almost like what they call postpartum depression, right? When when a woman gives birth to a child and it's there, and they're kind of like a little depressed. That happens to writers, right? Or separation anxiety, right? Because this is their baby. Here I am, a man or a woman, and I've written the screenplay, and it's mine. What do you mean I'm giving it to you? And then all of a sudden, the screenplay becomes something else. And the writer is saying to themselves, what do you mean you turned my drama into a comedy? What do you mean you turned the lead actor into a woman when it was a muscular man? You know what I mean? Well, the question is, does the writer have approval rights? And most often, unless they have a lot of leverage, a writer never has approval rights, because it can create a nightmare for the producer to have a writer to be able to come in there every 10 minutes and say, no, 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 no. There's the budgets. There's some directors who come in, experienced producers, and they think that you need to change things in order to make it more palatable to the audience, for their investors to be able to come in and see that there could be a return on their investment. It's very complicated. It can create a nightmare. If you're a book author, sometimes and you're big, you have a franchise behind you like Stephen King or Tom Clancy or something like that, of course they can get some approval rights, but rarely does a writer ever have approval rights, right? But that's important, because I know here most writers are thinking, what do you mean I can't? It's mine. I wrote this. There should be no reason why. I gave you the right to produce a film. And they may even say, my film, it technically isn't necessarily, but I don't. Now, sometimes you're lucky enough that if you're a writer and the producer is inexperienced, they'll rely on you, because they know they're smart enough that if they want to have the project done, they need to have the writer there, right? And they know that if they want that nuance, they need it. And if the writer is a writer, director, producer, then they have more leverage. But contractually, at least in the U.S., unless you have those rights, you can't do it, and that also can be a little complicated. But it's important for people to know that. So that's, in broad strokes, there's so many other items in these agreements that you find that you would find when you're trying to go secure one of these agreements, these rights to do something. So what do you have next? And I'm going to go over two, if you can give me just maybe like another 15 minutes or so, over another juncture, and then get to the last part of the juncture, which is in the middle. You may have already spoken to different people to get the money, to then secure the rights. You've spoken to Brad Pitt. You've spoken to, Morgan Freeman. You've spoken to, all these actors that you think are perfect for this role. Because you saw, say, for example, Seven, and you said, they had great chemistry together, and that's exactly what I want, and it's exactly the screenplay that I want, right? So your producers and your casting agents and your directors have secured some letters of interest, so they spoke to their agents, and they showed some interest. But now you have the money, so now you can actually pay these individuals, right? And to do that, you need to enter into an agreement. And these agreements, because without these agreements, again, you cannot then go to a distributor in a foreign country, in any country, in the US, but even in Europe, and say that you're prepared to distribute it, because there's certain elements in these contracts that you need to have. So what are some of these elements that you have in all these contracts, right? Well, some of these basic elements that you have in these contracts, you will also have when you have to hire a crew, right? Because you have to hire the director of photography, you have to hire the director. And even if you are, it almost seems a little schizophrenic, right? You're the director, and you're the producer, and you're the writer. You also have to write an agreement with the company saying that you have handed over all those rights, the creative rights, to the company. So, I've had some clients of mine who the producer, they set up a company just for the project, and they're the producers, and they hire themselves as a director because they're directors, so they're signing the agreement as a director and a producer, and they have to do that, right? Because they have to hand that over. But with third parties, the people you're going to hire, right? The director of photography, like I mentioned, the editor, the composer, all these things require agreements, right? But what are some of the key clauses in some of these? Some clauses that are very important that I now am going to share with you that I have not seen when the time has come to distribute these films, and distributors have asked, because I have not drafted these agreements for some of my clients, say here or say in Venezuela, where I have some clients, right? Although that's changing now, right? There has to be some basic work for hire language, right? Maybe you can help me out with this, because work for hire is essentially, in the US, the copyright law says that when I create something, right, it belongs to me, right? From the minute that I create it, right? Unless, say for example, Jose Maria hires me to write a script, or Jose Maria hires me to direct the film, right? If for some reason you don't have basic work for hire language, and I don't see this language, I don't even see language similar to it sometimes, unfortunately, in these agreements, distributors are reluctant to do it because there's lawsuits. For example, Spike Lee was involved in a lawsuit, which was surprising to many of us, where he hired, for the movie Malcolm X, he hired a technical consultant, right? Someone whom was a Muslim like Malcolm X, who was part of that generation, who knew him personally, who had produced a documentary. He hired him so that he could work with Denzel on the role. And in fact, the judge in this case said that several elements that were incorporated in the final script, this gentleman had contributed to the script, right? And these elements were then eventually in the shooting script, and they appeared on the screen, right? For some reason, which surprises me to this day, there was never an agreement signed with this individual. Nunca un acuerdo firmado con el señor, right? And so,
como tal, hubo un aporte de propiedad intelectual.
No hubo. That's right, exactly. So, ¿por qué sucede? Él pidió un crédito más lujoso, más prestigioso, no quería ser un technical consultant. Él pidió más dinero, y cuando le dijeron que no, dijeron, eso no fue el acuerdo, él decidió entonces hacer una demanda. Y exclamó que él era dueño, no solamente del guión, parte dueño, pero era parte dueño de la película. I mean, it's preposterous, but you know, he made a claim, right? You know, he said, I contributed elements to this screenplay, and these elements were incorporated. So I am now a co-author. So as a co-author, I'm entitled to a percentage. I co-own this with you. So I'm entitled to 50% of everything that you know. So this all could have been avoided, right? You know, by having him sign an agreement that says that, which is very standard. It's very standard. And Spike Lee's been in the business for years. This guy's, you know, I mean, he's a very accomplished filmmaker. He may have just slipped somewhere, you know, or maybe there was one that just didn't appear. But something very basic as you are work for hire, right? You are basically being hired to provide a service, and any intellectual property that you contribute belongs to me. The reason I say this is because I often see, and I don't know what the equivalent of this is here in the Dominican Republic. I know that Venezuela has something equivalent, right? Because I have a client of mine from Venezuela, right? And I work with an attorney there, and, where it stipulates that I see these agreements where they don't say that they hire someone who's a director or a DP or an editor, and there's nothing in there. It just says how much they're going to be paid. You know, it doesn't even say what their credit is going to be sometime, and that they have to deliver the film at a certain time, and that's it. You know, but they don't stipulate, you know, that everything they're doing that you're contributing belongs to me. And so when this is delivered, even with actors, sometimes I've seen that. It's just like a one-page says you agree to appear in the movie, and you're going to be paid this amount of money, and you're going to come on this day, and this is how much you're going to get. And sometimes even the part about, which we'll talk about in a second, like their profit participation, you know, as an actor. You know, you're paying me $10,000 to be in your movie, but I'm also going to be entitled to some back-end points, you know, some revenues from the. Even that sometimes is done like terribly, and it frightens me, and it was an issue we had to adjust it with one actor. But if you don't have any of that in there, the distributor then says, I don't know that we can distribute the movie because we're concerned that this actor is going to come back and sue us. Right.
La presunción es, en parte, el principio radica. Te dije, tiene que haber un contrato por escrito.
Right.
Entonces, el contrato es de interpretación restrictiva. Lo que no esté previsto, por ende no está autorizado. Se entendería que si eso no se estipuló, pues tendría fundamento poder reclamar sobre ese aspecto de la propiedad intelectual agregada de producto de ese trabajo. Pero también entra, otro aspecto a tomar en consideración, es que vamos a decir, ese editor o ese asesor que ha sido contratado para esa obra en específico no es un asalariado, pero la relación, el vínculo legal se entendería, se infiere, hay la presunción de que todo lo que él produzca pertenece a aquel para el cual él está trabajando. No sé si Carol...
Aunque no sea empleado de la
no es empleado, pero ha sido contratado precisamente para el desarrollo de ese proyecto, de esa obra. Entonces, lo que él aporta, número uno, si no es, porque hay la contradicción, o sea, número uno, si no hay una estipulación específica, expresa respecto a eso, pudiera decirse, bueno, pero yo no lo incluí en el contrato, yo estoy ahora, este es mi aporte, este es una propiedad intelectual que estoy, y por ende, a mí hay que pagarme, y de parte de aquel que lo ha contratado, puede decir, muy bien, pero yo lo he contratado para que usted trabaje para mí, para esta obra específica, por ende, todo lo que usted produzca me pertenece a mí. Pero por falta de esa estipulación, precisamente, ahí viene la experiencia, que es a lo que me refería. No, con una ley de recién creación, donde tenemos también un reglamento, pero hay cuestiones que se van a ir presentando en la práctica, situaciones de hecho que van a tener que crear derecho en el sentido de que van a tener que formar parte de un contrato y de estipulaciones claras precisamente para, ante esas ambigüedades, esas lagunas de esas relaciones en aspectos tal vez no regulados contractualmente, no se presenten esas situaciones que vayan a repercutir a nivel de la exhibición o distribución de la película de esos terceros al contrato, pero que tienen que ver con la comercialización de la película como tal. O sea que indiscutiblemente se puede presentar y para nosotros los abogados sobre todo eso es
sería materia de un caso para cada abogado poder ahí.
Pero esa es la diferencia.
Que se puede evitar previendo situaciones como esa que lo viene a dar la práctica, la experiencia.
O sea, es importante porque eso ha sido, en los Estados Unidos ha sido problemático, ¿no? Ha sido problemático porque han habido varias situaciones en cual, por ejemplo, y es más de otra disciplina, en cual han visto en el teatro un taller de un guión para una obra y contratan a un dramatist para que esa persona ayude al guionista a escribir la obra, a desarrollarla. Entonces no hay contrato, esa persona entonces. Eso sucedió con el que escribió la obra Rent, ¿no? Que a final antes de morirse, después a poco tiempo que se murió, la obra fue de Off-Broadway a Broadway. Pero antes de eso, cuando estaban desarrollando en el New York Theater Workshop, un Off-Broadway theater, pero muy prestigioso, contrataron a un dramatist, y ese dramatist, una profesora de la Universidad de NYU, ayudó bastante a desarrollar el guión y muchos elementos fueron incluidos en la obra, ¿no? Cuando él se murió, no tenían un acuerdo. Cuando ella decidió, cuando la dramatist le pidió a los herederos de Larson, que era su hermano y su hermano o algo así, que le dieran un porcentaje más alto del ingreso de la obra. Ellos le dijeron que no y le ofrecieron, creo que fue un punto, 2 puntos o algo así, o un porcentaje, 2 porcentajes. Ella hizo una demanda. ¿Qué sucedió? La corte entonces tuvo que... Sí, no, la corte tuvo que revisar...
¿Y que interpretar?
Sí, porque no había contrato. Uh-huh. Entonces, eso pudo ser que el juez, bajo la evidencia que hubo, pudo encontrar a favor del dramaturg. Y hubiera sido problemático entonces Pero no sucedió de esa forma. Eso se evita, ¿no? Y por eso cuando le explico, sin ese detalle, le explico a mi cliente cuando me dicen, no, este es el acuerdo que tenemos, eso no hay problema, esa persona no va a hacer una demanda. Puede suceder, ¿no? Puede suceder esa demanda. Y si sucede esa demanda, imagínate el inversionista como se pone. Dice, porque lo primero que hacen, por lo menos en los Estados Unidos, los que van a hacer una demanda es, ellos identifican cuáles son los que tienen el dinero, ¿no? Van a hacer una demanda de una persona pobre. You go for the one with the biggest money, right? And that's usually the investors and the producers. And if you do that, you're going to have really angry investors. And if you're a producer, an experienced producer, and you find yourself in a lawsuit for something like that, that is something that could ruin your reputation, maybe, hopefully not your career. Right? Este ejemplo se lo doy porque es un ejemplo que encontré, por lo menos gracias que pudimos redactar esos acuerdos, identificar esos partidos, indicarle con las cláusulas apropiadas que replante ese acuerdo por el otro, y el distribuidor le dice que estuvo bien, ¿no? Pues si el distribuidor lo hubiera querido, hubiera dicho, no podemos.
No, precisamente. Entonces, se requiere el contrato. Es el principio de prueba por escrito que rige, por ejemplo, en nuestro sistema de derecho, donde necesariamente eso tiene que estar consagrado y se aplica. Por ende, la cuestión de que, la presunción de que si no, lo que no esté previsto, pues justamente pudiera estar... No está contemplado por ende y pudiera, dependiendo de la parte a que uno se refiera, pues tener fundamento o no para que la demanda prospere. En estos casos no sé cómo terminó el primero que te referías y este último, si hubo que transarse con...
El de Larson, no, el de Rent, el de Spike Lee, el juez dijo que no era un autor, y tampoco el de Rent, pero...
Fundamentado en que él había sido contratado para dar ese servicio.
Encontraron que no había evidencia que esa persona era hubo una colaboración, pero no al nivel de que pudo participar como ser autor intelectual de la propiedad, ¿no? Pero que eso se evita indicando simplemente un acuerdo, que todos esos servicios son como un empleado, ¿no? que se entregan. Dos o tres ejemplos más que le quiero dar sobre estos tipos de contratos que son bastante importantes, ¿no? Entonces, si me dan 5 minutos más para hablar dos o tres de puntos de distribución. Uno es muy importante cuando una persona firma cualquiera de estos contratos, que uno tenga, yo típicamente pongo esto en dos categorías, ¿no? And I'm going to say this in English, it's a little easier, right? Every contract, when you're dealing with talent, comes to basically 3 categories and 2 subcategories, right? And what is the parties' roles and responsibilities and their expectations, right? And how do you break that down? Well, essentially is the roles and the responsibilities are essentially come down to credit and the service you're rendering, right? So that if you're going to be a producer on a project, right? Are you going to get executive producer? Are you going to get produced by? Are you going to get, is this for TV? So it's going to be created by? Is it going to be an associate producer, right? And if you are developing your company, is there going to be credit for your company also? You see Antena Latina Presents, so-and-so Productions in association with, right? The second part, which is what your expectations are, is also what is your compensation, right? What are you going to be paid, right? And every agreement that you have a conversation with, at least in the States, it depends on your leverage, right? If you're a first-time filmmaker with no money and no access, and somebody wants to invest in your project, you may not be able to get all these things, right? But if you're going to be paid a certain amount of money for something, what is the fixed compensation or fixed fee you are going to be paid for the service you're rendering, whether as a writer, a director, a producer, as talent, as an actor, How much money are you going to be paid? But then also, is there going to be some back-end compensation? And this is very important, you can translate. Are you going to be able to participate? Vas a tener el derecho a, no solamente que te van a pagar un pago fijo, ¿no?
Como proveedor del servicio.
Sí, pero te van a pagar un porcentaje de las ganancias de las películas. Eso es importante. And that's important for you to have a conversation. You may not be in a position to be able to ask for that, those sorts of things. In the States, there's standards. Here, there may not be those standards yet, right? And because it's a fluid, industry with laws that are now evolving, that may then subsequently be developed, and I would assume that somehow this industry is going to borrow from places like the U.S. or the U.K. in terms of like these standards, you know what I mean? But ultimately, as a writer, a director, a producer, or an actor, it's important for you to ask, what is going to be my role, obviously, in this, and what capacity I'm going to be functioning, and what are my expectations and your expectations? What's my credit? What's my compensation? The last thing I wanted to talk about is, because it's probably not enough time, I don't know how much time we have left, is this thing about distribution. If you wanted to talk about that first, and then maybe I can talk about, so you've produced your film, and now you want to distribute the film, right? Obviously, you want to. Distribution it's become significantly more complicated in recent years because the digital media has really changed the platform. So that it used to be that, films would go to the theater if you were lucky, and then after the theater, they would go through the cable process and, paid cable, premium channels, and then it would go through, through the network, the free TV over a number of years, DVD. That's all changed now. And now sometimes you have the reversal of windows. Sometimes some major studios will release the film at the same time in different countries to avoid piracy. Sometimes they will go straight to, it's very common now where they go straight sometimes. It used to be DVD, but now it's straight to video. Video meaning, digital distribution, like what we think of like Netflix, and streaming. There's VOD. All these things are things, but each one of these things, these markets, is a source of revenue for someone, right? So that when you're having a conversation as a producer, or, you know, or as a writer, director, producer, with your distributor, whoever is doing it, and ultimately the goal is to distribute it, right? You know, if you're lucky, you hire, you know, a sales rep, somebody who is familiar with the landscape, and sells movies for a living at the major festivals, right? But sometimes you're not that lucky, right? And it's important for anyone, if you're an investor and you're investing in a film, if you're a producer, if you know, and you want to make sure that your career, you know, takes off as a result of this, if you're a writer director and you want to make sure that your film ends up in the right place, that you're familiar with these different media. And also, if you own the rights to something, you want to be familiar with what you're giving away and what you're keeping, right? So that when you go to a distributor, there's always some key clauses. And it varies from country to media, you know what I mean? And what are some of these key, these key clauses? First one is the territory, right? You should really, well, the first one really is the term, the license, the period. For how long am I giving you these rights that we'll discuss in a minute, right? That I'm thinking about giving you. For how long am I giving it to you? Am I giving it to you for 3 years, for 5 years, for 7 years, 15 years, or for 25 years, right? Right? And that's very important because if that's not specified, then if it's specified at some point, those rights can come back to you, right? Which means you can then go to someone else or do it yourself, which is something much more feasible now, and will be far more feasible in the near future, thanks again to the digital landscape, right? Right. So how long is this license period? And that depends on how many offers you have. Just like with the option that I mentioned earlier, it depends on the type of film it is, how many people are interested in it. It depends on how hot the property is, depends on what the market is, if there's too many. And I've had some clients of mine that have they produce documentaries, and the subject has been very similar to somebody else's, and that other filmmaker has kept ahead of them all. And then when it's time to distribute the film and they go to HBO is interested, but they say to themselves, well, but we did that last year. And they know it, so they've had to go elsewhere. And that's it's very, that's often, very important for you to get a sense of that. So there's a license period, right? Now the license period, you have to think about, well, what's the territory? What territory am I? I often tell people when I'm on panels that Dominican Republic, although I hear is changing recently, and you can find this stuff online, you can go to some of these, the numbers or Box Office Mojo or IMDb, and you can see that films produced here, although the market's been saturated a little bit, do better, but in terms of box office, than American movies do here, even some of the big ones. Like, for example, the first one that I would always give examples of, which is very seminal, was Sankey Panky, right? That film made hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think it made over $1 million in box office, right? Well, that film was making more than some of the box office ones, right? Lotoman. Lotoman made more than Avatar. I mean, that's amazing, right? You can see this, right? And then you have great movies. I mean, one of my favorite movies is Sugar, right? I mean, I really enjoyed that movie about the baseball player, right? And they're great distributors, Sony Classics. But when the movie was distributed here, either because they didn't contract the right people, they didn't partner with the right people here, the movie didn't make a lot of money here. It made something like $50,000, right? Whereas, a movie like Play Ball will make $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. It's about a baseball movie, right? Movies here in the Dominican Republic do well, but there's the world beyond that, right? And the filmmaker says, I just want to get it in the theaters, right? That's where I want to get it. But no, you want to get it, if you can't get it in the theaters in another country, you want to get it, on the screen in another country. You want to get it on VOD. You want to get it on the airplanes. You want to get it in, in schools. You want to get it. These are all markets, right? And that's incredibly important. Right, of course. So that's the other issue. Right, so that's the other thing. What media, what market are you selling your rights to? Which ones are you selling this to? You know, is it going to be, you know, and it's related to territory, but is it going to be, you know, theatrical, or is it going to be just home distribution, including, which is still in some places DVD and digital? And it's a little tricky because, you know, every distributor will define things differently, right? And, you know, what's the difference between VOD and streaming? What's the difference between, you know, pay-per-view and VOD? And there's different forms of VOD, you know? So these are all very important for a producer, writer, director, or investor to have some sort of idea of what market is it that, what media is it that. And the territory is important. And something I've seen before in license agreements for some niche distributors, where they'll put a tricky clause in there where they say, the filmmaker says, I'm licensing my film to this distributor, and it's only supposed to be for the U.S. U.S. and Canada, right? And then the agreement says that it's being licensed for the U.S., Canada, and all English-speaking territories, right? The U.S., Canada, and all English-speaking territories. Well, that would include the U.K. That would include many countries, some countries in, you know, the Asian subcontinent or some other places where the English is still the primary language, right? Right? Australia, right? That's going to be a little tricky, right? Or I saw once where they said, I'm just giving them rights to my film for the, you know, for the Brazilian territory, but they said Brazil and Portuguese-speaking countries. And I mean, that by itself should have said, I said, well, if you miss Portugal in the language, you know, in that sentence, you know, that's, you know, okay, I don't see why. But there's also countries in Africa. There's countries in, you know, there's small regions in other parts of the Asian subcontinent where Portuguese is pretty dominant still, you know. So that's very important. It's tricky. I haven't seen it recently. I saw it a couple of years back. I saw it with some distributors, you know, and to this day, I'm wondering if it was just a typo or it was just somebody being a little slick or a little, you know. So that's very important for you as as an investor or a producer or an up-and-coming director writer, because, you know, you're saying to yourself, that's great, you know, my film is going to be in the U.S. and Canada, and then we have this distributor who wants to, you know, or this network, you know, who wants to, you know, air it in the UK. The BBC is interested in it, you know, so we're really, really happy about that. But then you have this clause in there, and then you can't do it. And they get a letter. They send a letter to the BBC saying, if they're unscrupulous, saying, you're infringing upon our rights because we have in our contract the rights to the US, Canada, and all English-speaking territories. You know what I mean? So that's very important. Two other things, quickly, that I wanted to mention. Okay, two other things that I wanted to mention that are very, very important. In these agreements, when someone comes to you to license your project, right? Again, regardless of what role you're playing in the film, you know, either an actor, or a producer, or you're investing money, you should always have a conversation with the individual who wants to distribute your film about what their release commitment is, right? Are they committed to releasing your money? They pay you the money, right? They give you the money, and in advance, right? You know, they call it, you know, a minimum guarantee. They give you a certain amount of money first, right? And you're happy to have the money, and you're happy to have a distributor, which is almost impossible to get because you know, it's a shrinking market and there aren't that many, right? But what happens once you do that? You know, you say, well, I only signed the license with them for 3 years or 7 years or 15 years, or let's just say it's 3 years, and then you say it's great, just 3 years. But then they're not required to release the film. They're not required to put it in a theater if they said they are. They're not required to get it broadcast. So it's important for you to have a conversation whenever you have these conversations with someone who's, you know, or your team, to say, I want to make sure that there's a release commitment, and I want to make sure, abundantly sure, that if they don't commit, if they don't by a certain date do what they say they're going to do with respect to, you know, getting my film out to the broadest audience or in a particular territory or media, that we can then get our film back.
Tú
sabes que eso es un punto importante y se cree, y tal vez ya para terminar, no sé si quieres, que eso se crea inclusive a nivel del guionista, del screenwriter. O sea, cuando hace la cesión de los derechos patrimoniales al productor, es lo que llamamos el derecho de reivindicación. Si usted dentro de un año, año y medio no produce la película, no desarrolla el proyecto, pues entonces yo tengo el derecho a reivindicar el derecho patrimonial cedido. Lo mismo ocurre entonces con la distribución. Si para X tiempo usted distribuidor no me ha colocado dentro del ámbito para lo cual yo lo contraté, pues por igual yo reivindico ese derecho y me puedo buscar otro distribuidor. Y son precisamente cada una de estas particularidades en el aspecto práctico de toda la comercialización de la obra cinematográfica, de la película, que tiene necesariamente que tomar en cuenta desde el autor, el productor y cada uno de los agentes que intervienen en esta industria. No sé.
I wanted to say one more thing.
Sí, seguro.
So, I want to thank everyone for bearing with me, switching with the dual language, attempt on my part from Spanish to English and to Spanish. But I want to direct you. There's a lot of resources online, and one place that you can go, a couple places you can go to get a sense. Never substitutes having a good agent or a good lawyer or proper advice, a good accountant. The unions are, first of all, for the Copyright Office in the U.S. Copyright. If you go to U.S. Copyright, if you go to copyright.gov, you'll find more about these. And now it's dual lingual. It's written in Spanish and English, right? So you get a sense of these things. Then there's also the Writers Guild of America, WGA.org. Then there's SAG, of course, which you should all be familiar with SAG, especially now with SAG Indie, right? That's SAG.org. And they have SAG Indie for low-budget films. SAG has a global rule, so if you hire one actor or a stuntman that's a member of SAG, you have to abide by SAG. That's very important. They will put a lien on your movie if you don't. Don't think that, all I got to do is pay him, whatever the actor tells me I got to pay them and I'm okay. There's a whole paperwork process, so you should become familiar with that sort of thing. Then there's the Producers Guild. The Producers Guild does not have a collective bargaining agreement with the studios or the networks the way WGA and SAG-AFTRA, now that they've merged, because SAG and AFTRA have merged, right? They don't have a collective bargaining agreement the way they do. But the Producers Guild does give you a sense, they're a very good resource, and they certainly give you a lot of information about what the role of a producer is because of this issue of credit and compensation. A couple years back in one of the films, who could go on stage and get an award and who's really a producer and who's not. These are very, very, they're good places for you to start to kind of get a sense of this thing, because there's no way, it's impossible for us to cover all this stuff. And at times, if you can tell, I was being, I was jumping around a little because I want to see if I can include as many things as possible. So I want to thank you for giving me the privilege to come and talk to you, and for forgiving me for switching between Spanish and English.
Gracias a todos y que tengan buen resto del día.